Hi, I'm Shelley Wood. You might know me from shelleywood.com. This is my tiny sewing room where I make doll clothes sewing videos. Today I'm going to show you how to press a seam open and otherwise how to use an iron with doll clothes, especially if you're sewing doll clothes. But before we begin, let's talk about the variety of irons that are actually available to you. This little one appears in my videos a lot, but the iron I use most often is my Black & Decker Classic. It comes with a number of nice features, including the hole where you put your water, because it does offer a steam option. Okay, you can see little holes where the steam comes through. It also has a variety of settings, and the orange settings use the steam. There's a guide on the back of the iron, that's what I'm showing a picture of, and it helps you match the settings to the fabric that you're using. But be advised, this iron gets really hot. It's not for use with children. We do have this children's iron at our house, and it can actually be plugged in and warmed up a bit, but in my videos, it usually is just there for show. I don't use it very often, so it's not usually warm. The tiny black one is also only for demonstrations. It's actually made of iron though and could be used. Now I also have this medium-sized iron, which is about 4.5 inches long. And then I use a truly tiny iron that's been designed by the Dritz company. It's a mere 2.5 inches long, and I use this one a lot. It has a little stand to keep it upright, and we'll see in this video how I use it. You can use the buttons on top to adjust the temperature settings. They range from 1 to 4. It has a nice narrow tip, which makes it easy to iron those tiny corners on things like Barbie clothes. Now usually we think of ironing as an action where we move the iron across the fabric to flatten it. But if you take a look here, we see that these have been folded, and so there's a crease in the middle, and so I'm going to actually iron them, not press them. To iron, again, you move the iron across the fabric, and that helps to smooth out that folded area in these bodice pieces that we've cut out for sewing purposes. Now when I say in my video that you press something, pressing means that the iron holds still. In my videos I press garment edges, some shoulder seams, and most seams where pieces are joined. That's where I tend to actually press. Now in the next video clip I'll show you how to open a seam and then press it. You need to use your fingers to open the seam up. So you run your finger over the seam to what we call finger press it. And finger pressing is an actual term in sewing. So you open up your fabric, and you can see here's the right side, here's the wrong side. So we would be looking at the seam that would be on the inside of the garment. And I like to use my fingernail to kind of separate those two pieces, and then I actually push down with the tip of my finger to finger press. Then I rest the iron over the seam very briefly, and you don't run it over like in a back and forth movement. You finger press, and then you just press the iron directly over the seam, and that's why it's called pressing. You can use spray starch to stiffen the fabric, but be wary, spray starch can get inside your iron. It seeps through the little dots, the little holes, and then the next time you go to use the steam feature, old starch can seep out and discolor your fabric. It gets inside those little holes, and then yeah, I make that funny face. Now, what about the teeny tiny iron? I did say I was going to show you how to use that, and my Dritz iron doesn't get quite as hot as my Black & Decker, so sometimes I just use its narrow nose to open those seams the same way we would with finger pressing. So again, I open up the seam, like push a fingernail in between the two swatches of fabric that are part of the seam, and then I kind of finger press with this little narrow-headed iron because it's not really warm, and then I finish it with that final press, and I'm actually pressing here. I'm pushing down while I'm just laying the iron over the seam. Okay, again, make sure it's open, lay the iron down on top of the seam, and that's what pressing means. Now your lined collars and sleeves, they will need to be clipped before you can invert and press them. If you don't, the corner seams will pucker, and you can kind of see some puckering anyway on the one that I'm working on here, because it does happen sometimes. Now notice that before we start to work with this, it's got a lot of curl to it, so you want to press at least once to flatten all your seams and really make those seams seal into the fabric nicely. And now you can see it's flat. Once I've flattened the clipped edges, then I'm ready to work with that, and I'll use a chopstick to help me invert that garment piece. It's just a piece of garment that hasn't been sewn yet. So I take that chopstick in my hand, and after I've gotten it kind of open, so I want to start opening up to invert. Invert means turn it right side out. And after I've got it where I don't think I can get my fingers inside there anymore, then I reach for that chopstick. There are actual tools like a chopstick that you can buy at your fabric store or your craft store that will help you to actually turn these nicely the same way I'm doing with a chopstick. But with doll clothes, chopsticks are very narrow, and I think they're really useful. Notice how I turn the chopstick a little to reach into those corners. And then also I just use my hands sometimes to kind of pull to open up that corner a little bit. The chopstick also helps me smooth seams as I'm working with the iron to go around corners and press. You need to do that pause to press as you go. So again, press is just kind of top down using the iron, not rubbing across. And I'm using the chopstick to kind of straighten out those edges to get into those corners along that seam. And the chopstick kind of makes sure that I'm not like pressing those edges inside. So I want to make sure those edges are nice and clean. That chopstick is a super handy tool. And now I press, and then I move the iron to another location and press. And a lot of times I have to rotate that iron around quite a bit, or I'll rotate the garment piece around. And I continue to use that chopstick as I go to help keep those seams nice and straight while I'm working. Again, press, you just set the iron on top and let the heat do the work. You don't want to rub it against the fabric. And the idea here is to get all those little lumps and bumps and irregularities out of the seams, so your seam is nice and clean. It doesn't hurt to flip a garment around and press from the other side. I do that frequently. It just kind of makes sure that the seal is tight on both sides. Now you can run into some problems when you've lined a garment and you're joining those inverted portions of the garment because it's very thick like denim, and when you're dealing with a tiny little piece of doll clothing, getting those seams to flatten out can be really tricky. The other thing you want to watch for is you'll notice when I finger press these that there's a little bit of frayed edge that's sticking out over the top of where the garment is going to be, I guess you'd call it exposed. You don't want these to be exposed, so you want to clip off any corners that might be exposed when the garment is worn by the doll. And now we're ready to open that up and really press that seam nice and tight. And now it won't hang over the edge anymore. Don't be afraid to trim corners that are kind of sticking out like that. And here I'm going to use my little teeny tiny Dritz iron. It's great for Barbies if you're making doll clothes for Barbie or smaller dolls, dollhouse sized dolls like the little 7-inchers. If you're making that size doll, I highly recommend that you get yourself one of these Dritz irons. It's really wonderful for tiny little pieces of fabric. And by the way, my mother-in-law bought this for me, so thank you, Anita. It's a wonderful gift and I use it often. And you'll notice because of the position of those, I just kind of eased my iron over it instead of pressing. Well, that's all I have for you today. Thanks for watching. If you like my videos and my free patterns, please show your appreciation by telling your friends all about my website where you can find free patterns for doll clothes like this dress. Goodbye.